Parlays and player props are back. It's week 10 of the NFL season. Today, I got 6 picks plus 1 underdog fantasy entry we will talk about at the end of the video. If we go 6-0 in this video, I'm giving away $250. All you got to do to enter, just subscribe. If you want to drop a like too and you're feeling generous, do that. But let's recap how we did on Thursday night. So close to a 2-0 night. Miles Sanders, we took his over in receiving yards. He got that done. We were a little bit lucky there, but we were unlucky with Adam Thielen finishing with 6 receptions. We needed 7, just 1 on the hook. Brutal, but I'm feeling good about the card we got cooked up for today for Sunday's slate of action. And let's try to go 6-0 in this video and give away some money. Who says no? Before we dive into it, I did talk about Underdog Fantasy, which I'll talk about them more at the end of the video. But for new users that sign up using our code, you get a free square for Garrett Wilson, the New York Jets wide receiver, to get 1 yard. Garrett Wilson will get that done. So if you want to sign up, make sure you take advantage. Use our code COS or the top link in the description. You also get a 100% deposit match up to $100. Take advantage. Let's dive into our picks. We got 6 of them. It's going to be a long video. Dive into the first one. It's going to be this guy, DeAndre Hopkins of the Tennessee Titans. I like his over 59.5 receiving yards, minus 118 on FanDuel. Now, if this line goes up to, I don't know, 62, 63.5, I like it there. And this is a guy in Hopkins that we obviously know, if you've been watching the NFL over the past, decade, you know how talented this guy is. And I really like how he's performed so well so far, so with Will Levis at quarterback. Now, so far, they've only played 2 games together. And you look at the first game, Hopkins, 4 receptions on 6 targets. That was a game he had 128 yards, 3 touchdowns, a ridiculous game. And then the next game on Thursday Night Football, 4 receptions, 11 targets for 60 yards, so barely squeaking over this line. But the 11 targets, look, Will Levis, we've seen through his 2 starts, he's not afraid of taking risks. If he sees his guy one-on-one, especially DeAndre Hopkins, he's not afraid to throw it up. DeAndre Hopkins, we know he's been super talented for his whole NFL career, and that's what we like to see. Will Levis, the guy that's not afraid to be like, oh, I don't want to throw those passes, which is kind of how Ryan Tannehill was. He's given at least Hopkins plenty of chances to get it done, and with Traylon Burks banged up, it was expected to be out. This wide receiver core doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's a reason Will Levis is throwing it to DeAndre Hopkins 11 times, and they just could not connect last week. But like I said, they had a lot. They played on Thursday, so they had more than a week to get ready and get back on the same page. This is a tough matchup against Vita Vea and this Buccaneers defensive line to run the football against. So I expect them to struggle a little bit running. Expect them to lean on the pass game. We've seen wide receivers just the last 2 weeks. First Tampa Bay, Noah Brown at 153 yards. Tank Dell, 114. Stephon Diggs, 70. Gabe Davis, 87. Khalil Shakir, 92. All these guys just in the last 2 weeks have smoked this line versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Normally teams have to pass versus them. I would not be surprised if the Tennessee Titans are passing a little bit more on Sunday. I liked his over 4.5 receptions for DeAndre Hopkins, but like I said, the last 2 games where he's ended with 60 and 100 something, he only had 4 receptions. So if he can even get 5, which they have a little bit more juiced on the over, I think we got a good chance at cashing this one. Go do your thing, D-Hop. We're counting on you. Over 59.5 receiving yards. If the line moves up, I really think D-Hop gets well above 70. Go have a day. Let's move on to another guy that is going to get the ball a lot. That's my not so bold prediction. His name's Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. Over 100.5 rushing plus receiving yards, minus 114 on FanDuel. Personally, I'd play this to right around 104.5. And if you're looking for the rushing plus receiving yards on FanDuel, it's always under the rushing tab. It's always a weird spot they put it, but that is where they put it. On other books, it's obviously in different places. And if you need an individual line, I like the rushing yards for CMC, but we know CMC is capable of going out there and get 60 rushing yards and 50 receiving yards, heck, even more receiving yards than that. So I like combining them for rushing plus receiving for a guy we know is involved in both sides, passing and running the football. But on paper, if you look at this matchup against the Jaguars, you might be like, ooh, this is a stout rushing defense. In fact, you look at the Jags allowing just 3.6 yards per carry, the 4th lowest in the NFL. And while that might scare some people, I really am not afraid of them. I mean, this is a Jags team that, on paper, yeah, they got great stats, but they really haven't faced a lot of good running backs and a lot of good rushing attacks. And the 49ers are one of the best there is in the NFL. And we've seen, Jacksonville, only 5 players this season have had 10 or more rushing attempts against them. That's a sign that, hey, teams just are not trying to run the football. Teams just maybe are out of the game by the time they get the ball, or things that just go their different ways, weird game plans. Just see games that they just aren't facing teams that want to run the football. 49ers want to run the football. They don't want to see Brock Purdy throwing it 40 times. You look at the 5 guys that had 10 or more rushing attempts. Alvin Kamara had 17 attempts, 3.6 yards per carry. Bijan Robinson only 14 carries, but 7.5 yards per carry. Dameon Pierce only at 2.2 yards per carry. Isaiah Pacheco 5.8 yards per carry. And Deion Jackson in week 1, 13 carries, only 1.1 yards. So you look at the guys that struggled. Deion Jackson, Dameon Pierce, And you could say Alvin Kamara maybe a little bit, but the guys that did well are really the talented guys. The three most talented guys, Kamara, Bijan, and by Pacheco, they did actually pretty decently against this team. And I think that you would consider CMC to be arguably one of the best, if not the best, running back in football. So I really do think he's going to come out here and have a day. CMC, you look at him on the year, averaging 81.5 rushing yards per game, 36.5 receiving yards. That's good for 118 total. Off their bye week, coming off a 3-game losing streak. Look, I don't expect them to say, hey, Brock Purdy, you go throw it a ton, man. No, they're going to try to lean on the run. Hopefully Trent Williams is back, their left tackle, but still I think they're going to have to lean on the run here. And even if maybe they get behind in this game, we know CMC can do his thing. CMC has 100 plus rushing plus receiving yards, hitting the over in 5 of 8 games this season. The games he didn't, he had 52. That was the game he was injured at halftime. 78 when they won by 32 points. He didn't play really any in the fourth. Then 96 in the other game. So you see him getting real close to this. If it's not for 2 random anomalies where he gets injured or it's a complete blowout, he's been hitting this line pretty consistently. And I think this is a great day for him to get back on track after 3 straight duds for this team. I think he has a big game in Jacksonville. Also, he probably scores a touchdown. CMC, we love you. Over 100.5 rushing plus receiving yards. Go do it in the air or on the ground. I don't care. Get the job done. Let's move to another star running back. For this one, we're only relying on receiving yards. It's Austin Ekeler. Over 35.5 receiving yards, minus 115. On BetMGM, personally, I'd play this to 38.5. I don't want to back rushing plus receiving yards here because this is a Chargers team that we know sometimes when they go and gets tough, what do? We ain't running the football. We rather pass it with Justin Herbert. That's what they like to do. And personally, I saw DraftKings have this line at minus 135. I'd probably just pivot to FanDuel, who has a slightly higher line but less juice. We don't want to be laying a ton of juice on picks. But we've talked about Ekeler before. Last week, he burned us. He burned us good. We took his over in receiving yards, 2 receptions, 23 yards, 7 targets, 3 drops. That was tied for the most of his career. 3 drops. It was just bad. I don't know how to explain that. I mean, that's an anomaly if there ever was one. The guy is normally one of the most sure-handed backs in the NFL, and he dropped a lot of easy passes that would have easily cleared his line. So I'm going to go right back to him because I think it was a great read, and the Chargers honestly need him out there because Mike Williams, we've already talked about him, out for the year. Josh Palmer is on IR, no timetable for return. So outside of Keenan Allen, they don't really have reliable pass catchers. Quentin Johnston, the rookie, he's been all right, but not something you really love. Their tight ends, Gerald Everett and Donald Parham, sure, those guys are all right, but this is a team that needs Ekeler out there, especially in the receiving game, and I expect them to target him heavily. I mean, we've seen this season, Ekeler, 47-35, which would have been on the hook, 194 and 23 receiving yards. I mean, since his return from injury, when all these guys have been out, 7 and 8 targets. So they're still targeting him a ton out of the backfield. Obviously, that week with 94, we would love that this week. But this other game, when we had 3 drops, he had 7 targets. So the targets are there. I expect him to see another at least 4 targets, probably closer to 6 or 7, maybe even 8, in what should be a pass-heavy game for them against the Detroit Lions, one of the better teams at stuff in the run. And so we've seen, tight ends absolutely destroy the Lions. That's mostly because their linebackers are not good in coverage. That kind of applies to running backs too. Linebackers are normally the guys guarding the running backs. So when tight ends are destroying this team, I expect running backs to destroy it as well. They just haven't faced a lot of elite running backs out of the backfield. And we've seen, when he gets targeted out of the backfield, Ekeler that is, he does well. And 26 career games with Justin Herbert starting and him seeing 6+ targets, he has 30+ receiving yards in 23 of 26 and hit this over in 19 of 26. So the man's getting real close to it, if not going over almost every single time. I'll take my chances against the Lions team that will stop the run, so I don't see the Chargers really running the ball a ton. You look at Justin Herbert's pass attempts line sitting at 35.5. They expect him to be throwing it a lot. And honestly, there's not a lot of guys out there that are better at catching the football than Keenan Allen and then Austin Ekeler right behind him. So I really like a big day to make us back some money that we lost last week backing him. Austin Ekeler over 35.5 receiving yards, my 3rd play of the week. But let's move to, honestly, this video is so weird because we're back to running back to get receiving yards. Now we're backing a quarterback to get rushing yards because it's Lamar Jackson over 40.5 rushing yards, minus 114 on FanDuel. This is another line that would play to 43.5, playing these all for 1 unit in this video. But this is a big game. You got the 7-2 Ravens playing host to the 5-3 Browns. Obviously a big game for this division. And we honestly, the Browns are going to try their hardest because they lose this one. Now they've lost the series against the Ravens 0-2 because the Ravens beat them earlier this year. So big game for both these two teams. And we've seen in Lamar's last 9 games versus Cleveland, done pretty well. Averaged 65.2 rushing yards per game. Hit this over in 7 of 9 games. Of the 2 misses, one was earlier this season when he only had 27 yards. The Ravens won by 25. Cleveland also had Dorian Thompson-Robinson starting in that game. He threw 3 interceptions, really setting up this Ravens offense offensively on good field position. And then the other game was game get injured. He only had 4 pass attempts. I put the 4 pass attempts because that shows he was basically injured in the first quarter. Obviously, we're not going to factor that in here a ton. So outside of those weird, outcomes, any game that's been close, Lamar Jackson has been hitting this over against the Browns. I expect on Sunday to be no different. I mean, this is a Ravens team that probably struggled to run the ball against a very, very good Cleveland Browns defensive line. And sure, they'll know that Lamar Jackson will be running the football sometimes. But honestly, I think the best rushing attack for the Ravens, spread the ball out and you run it with Lamar Jackson. You obviously you have the extra blocker in there. And we've seen Lamar this season had success. I mean, you look at him, he's hit this over in 5 of 9 games. 3 of the 4 misses, we saw the Ravens win by 16 plus points. If the Ravens are smoking the other team, they're not going to put Lamar in a harm's way. But in a divisional game that is big for the division in terms of winning this game, I think this one's competitive, and we see them have to lean a little bit more on Lamar Jackson. We've seen in these divisional games since 2020, Lamar Jackson, 14 divisional games against AFC North. He had 45 plus rushing yards in 11 of 14. So a lot of these games, he's crushing the line when he is in the division. He's kind of like, I don't really want to throw a sketchy pass. Let me go in and just run the football. And he's done really well. Also, you think about teams that have already seen him before. They kind of had a better game plan for him. So maybe they know the reads that Lamar Jackson kind of progresses through, or they try to take away those first 2. And when he gets the first 2 reads taken away, they're like, all right, I'll just run the football. You also look at his rushing attempts line, set at 7.5. A lot of books have that at minus 140, some at like minus 160, some books even at 8.5. We look at when Lamar Jackson has 7 or more rush attempts, he's hit that in 22 of his last 7 games with 7 or more. They think he gets 8. I really like Lamar Jackson. I know he is a different offensive coordinator, but they are still averaging about 5 designed runs per game. And I think we know Lamar Jackson, if he can bust off one of those for 25 yards, which is not crazy to say, he easily hits this over. But I think the scrambles alone, Lamar Jackson probably has a day on Sunday. Give me his over 40.5 rushing yards as my 4th pick of the day. Let's dive into a 5th one, a receiving yards prop for a wide receiver from the Houston Texans, Tank Dell. His name is over 54.5 receiving yards, minus 115 on BetMGM. And you got to look at this Texans team, who is going to be on the road taking on a tough matchup in the Bengals, and they got a lot of injury news for this Texans team. You look at Nico Collins, their wide receiver 1, he is out for this game. Robert Woods, who missed last week, was questionable, logged a full practice on Friday. I anticipate him playing. I obviously am not the Houston Texans, medical staff, so maybe they hold him out. But either way, I'm not too scared about Bobby Trees playing. And at the end of the day, this is the Texans team that cannot run the football, and I expect it to be tough to run against a very good Bengals defense. So they're likely going to put the ball in CJ Stroud's hands, basically what they did all last week against Tampa Bay, and they're going to live with whatever happens. CJ Stroud obviously playing back in Ohio, went to Ohio State, not necessarily the closest 2 places, but I'm sure he has some friends and family and former teammates in attendance. And I expect him to ball out. We saw last week he balled out like crazy, and Tank Dell did too. He ran 35 routes, 11 targets, a 31.4 target share, and it was 6 receptions, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. Now, I don't necessarily think Tank Dell does that because that would be absolutely ridiculous, but we're asking for 55 receiving yards from wide receiver 1 on this team that's probably going to have to throw it 35 times on Sunday. Sure, I'll take my chances. This season when Tank Dell has seen 7 plus targets, which he probably should see on Sunday. He's ended with 72, 145, and 114 yards since week 3. 7 wide receivers have 7 or more targets against the Bengals. All of them had 50 plus receiving yards. 6 of those 7 hit at least this over. So I really do think this is not the greatest matchup on paper. I don't normally target overs against the Bengals, but this feels like a volume play for Tank Dell. They need him out there, and I think he has a great shot. I mean, this guy can get chunk plays, but he also can do the 10, 15 yarders, kind of get those 4 or 5 receptions, build it up, and easily hit this over. I think this line's way too low for the volume he should see. Give me Tank Dell's over. And my last over of the week will be Michael Thomas of the New Orleans Saints, over 41.5 receiving yards, minus 114 on FanDuel. Now, if you backed Michael Thomas last week, whether it was like in an alternate receiving yards parlay, you're like, oh, this guy's always hit this over or something like that, you got absolutely wrecked. Because last week, Michael Thomas had as many receiving yards and receptions as you and I. Yeah, he had a big 0 receptions for 0 yards, 1 target. The man ran 24 routes. You'd think the man did not play. No, he played. He was out there a lot, just barely any work. And look, I'm not out here to say, hey, Derek Carr, throw him the football, but we know how wide receivers can be. They can be a little bit of a diva, and I expect Michael Thomas to get a little bit more than 0 receptions this weekend. And like, I'd be so shocked if it's back-to-back duds for Michael Thomas going into their bye week. And we've seen Michael Thomas, this guy that's averaging 49 receiving yards per game, he actually had hit this over in all 8 games prior to last week, which is why, he's had a very high floor, which is why I'm sure people started to trust him for like 25 or 40 receiving yards, then put an absolute dud. But it's not like they weren't targeting him prior to that. He had 7+ targets in 4 straight weeks prior to this one. So now it's a tougher matchup for the run game against the Minnesota Vikings defense, which has quietly been very good against the run, expecting that to lean on the pass. And if Michael Thomas returns to his normal volume, which he had been seeing all season long prior to last week, we should be fine. This season, 18 wide receivers have 5 or more targets versus Minnesota. Like I said, Michael Thomas has 7 or more in 4 straight weeks prior to last week. 13 of those guys had 50 or more receiving yards. We only need 41. Look, Derek Carr's not an idiot. He's been in the NFL long enough to know he'll look at his stats and be like, yo, how did I not get a single reception to Michael Thomas? You normally don't want wide receivers to be angry at not getting the ball. So I wouldn't be surprised Michael Thomas honestly hits this like in the first quarter or first half. They need to get the rock to him a little bit more. I know he's not the number one guy, Chris Olave is, but I still do think Michael Thomas is due for a big day on Sunday. Give me his over in receiving yards. And finally, let's talk about Underdog Fantasy. I know it's a long video, so I did this Underdog Fantasy entry, trying to turn $25 into $500. All the picks I already talked about, minus Michael Thomas, because I didn't want to do a 6-pick entry. I don't even think you can do that. So if this hits, I'll give away $250. So boom. Not only are we giving $250 if we go 6-0, I'll also give away $250 if this entry goes 5-0. That's simple. Okay, we could give away $500 if we dominate on Sunday. Let's have a wonderful weekend. You guys let me know your favorite picks down below. If you want to sign up for Underdog Fantasy, make sure you use our code COS or the top link in the description. Get a 100% deposit match up to $100. And for all new users, you will get that Garrett Wilson free square for Sunday Night Football. Let's have a day. It's our only NFL video for Sunday. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys back in the next one for Monday Night Football. I'll see you then. If you want to check out our other NBA videos on our second channel videos, go show those some love as well. I'm Austin. I'm signing out. See you guys in the next one. Peace.